EA is now on Twitch. Join us Wednesday nights when Alistair reads a bedtime story, and Sunday mornings for a few hours of chill casual gaming, plus interviews, special guests, pickup streams, and more. Visit twitch.tv/EA Podcasts and follow us to be notified when we go live, plus access VODs of past broadcasts.
Escape Pod, Episode 919, Emotional Resonance, by VM Ajala.
Hello and welcome to Escape Pod, your weekly science fiction podcast. I'm Mer Lafferty, your co-editor and host for this week. Our story this week is Emotional Resonance by VM Ayala. VM is a queer, disabled, biracial Mexican-American sci-fi fantasy writer with chronic pain and fatigue. She loves dragons, giant robots, her partner, and sometimes her tortoiseshell cat. You can find them at spacevalkyries.com and most social media places at spacevalkyries. It's read for us by Julia Rios. Julia is a queer Latinx writer, editor, podcaster, and narrator whose fiction, nonfiction, and poetry have appeared in Latin American Literature Today, Lightspeed, and Goblin Fruit, among other places. Their editing work has won multiple awards, including the Hugo Award. Julia is a co-host of This Is Why We're Like This, a podcast about the movies we watch in childhood that shape our lives, for better or for worse. They've narrated stories for Escape Pod, Podcastle, Pseudopod, and Cast of Wonders. They're OMG Julia on Twitter. Now get ready to double check all of your systems, because it's story time.
Emotional Resonance by VM Ayala. Narrated by Julia Rios. Arbor's favorite part of a mission was always the first view of a planet. Even after 700 years of being a giant robot, it never got old. Green and blue clouds churned over purple seas, imposing storms that flashed red with threads of lightning. Beautiful. And they were sent to clear it of all human life, courtesy of Exoplenty Incorporated. Ugh. That slogan clung to their digital psyche, no matter how hard they tried to scrub it from their databases. At least this part, floating in orbit, wasn't so bad. Proximity alarms went off, a shrill beep and an itch on their right arm. Okay, this part wasn't usually bad. Sensors indicated a friendly mech to the right, and it was floating too close. The incoming mech's sharp metal angles were humanoid like Arbor's, 2 hands, 2 feet. This model's design was new, its frame less bulky and more streamlined. It was freshly painted blue and silver with huge blue glass eye sensors, a contrast to Arbor's dented, weathered shell and red eyes. The other mech's MIND, a cute corporate acronym for Monitoring Interface Neural Driver, blipped into existence, a projected hologram of faded colors and warped outlines, and peered over the edge of her robot's helmet plate in awe. She was listed as Crow, her name and ID hovering above her. She wore a pink bomber jacket with glowing white lines. Her curly hair was a gradient of pink, white, and blue, her skin just a shade darker than Arbor's own dark brown. She was super cute. Arbor was relieved they still felt infatuation, simulated or not. "Sorry," Crow said. I was admiring the view and found myself drifting. First mission post-download? Arbor asked. They projected their hologram self-image on the shoulder of their body, went for their classic black boots and jacket look. It was the first time they had done that in well over 200 years. Crow nodded. Freshly installed yesterday. Wasn't expecting to feel anxious about it, given that I'm now, you know. She gestured down her projection body, and her mech shell made the same motion. A giant murder machine incapable of feeling upset? Arbor supplied. Crow smiled. Exactly. Welcome to the beginning of 1,000 years as a killer robot. Don't worry, they only take your ability to question or disobey their orders. All the little quirks and unique things that make you, well, you stay intact. It was in the contract, and it was obvious Crow hadn't been allowed to read the fine print. That was common. Shitty, but common. I guess that's something, Crow said. She looked down at the planet and sighed. I suppose we'll be fighting soon. Does that bother you? Crow shrugged. Occasionally, she became semi-translucent, her outline warping or voice distorting. Bit of a trick question, don't you think? If it bothered me, does that mean they did a bad job of removing my ability to doubt what I'm told to do? Maybe. Arbor's projection leaned back and floated in space. Or maybe it means they programmed your inability to question orders so well, it even feels like you can doubt them. Shit, that's a good point. Arbor laughed. Huh, I've had some time to ponder. Crow looked at Arbor's body, head tilted as her glowing blue eyes examined their information in the network. They felt the ping like a gentle tap on the shoulder and sent their detailed files along. Incoming priority notice. Initiate mind launch. Operation to commence in 30 seconds. The text was in bright red, splashed against the planet below. Suppose that's our cue, Crow said. I should get back. Sorry for almost drifting into you. She gave a surprisingly shy glance back at Arbor. See you again? They nodded. Arbor very much wished to see her again. After centuries of silence and distance, they felt a newfound emotion, somewhere between happiness and anxiety. Their heart beat faster, face flush and warm, chest tight. All simulated reactions. After all, they weren't human anymore. Nowadays, their heart was a replaceable nest of wires and power supplies buried in the toughest alloy. Still, Crow winked and disappeared, her mech moving back into formation with the other dots labeled green and friendly, forming a circle around the planet. Arbor held on to the interaction with Crow as they descended to the rival corporation mining town and set everything on fire, rewinding the memory to override the destruction, replaying Crow's laughter to drown out the screams. Afterward, both Crow and Arbor returned to orbit while Exoplenty's crews took over the town's mining equipment. See, Exoplenty wanted the rich deposits and wasn't above some illegal murder to get rid of a rival and take all of their tech in the process. At least guard duty was simple, redundant, almost peaceful if they blocked out what they'd just done well enough. Are we capable of regret? Crow asked. Her projection huddled on her mech's shoulder, staring down at the planet with an almost absent expression. As far as first incursions went, this was a rough one. It was only civilians, no mechs to defend them. It was obvious Crow was grappling with the weight of it, or the weight of not feeling it. Arbor understood. The sensation was an empty hole in their proverbial chest, a hollow where some vital part of them had been taken. Arbor shrugged. Their mech shrugged in time. Why did you do that? Crow pointed, and their robot pointed too. She laughed. Why did I do that? You have light speed processing power, and you're asking me to tell you? Ah, are we even speaking, or are we just thinking very fast at each other and simulating speech to better help our human personalities comprehend it? Arbor thought about that for a long moment, or was it a very fast moment? Did the time actually matter so long as they enjoyed the interactions? Incoming priority notice. Return to docking station. They sighed. We'll have to continue this next time. I'll find you when I wake up, Crow said. Promise? Arbor asked. Crow nodded. Her mech nodded too, and flew away towards a rectangular ship looming in the distance. The centuries-old routine settled back into Arbor's servos. Sleep, wake up, do corporate dirty work. Sleep, wake up, redo. Again and again. Smoke billowed in the atmosphere, the gray and black flowing into green and blue clouds until the storms erased any trace of their crimes. Would Exoplenty get a nice boost in revenue from that stolen mine? They felt nothing but the afterimage of remorse and anger, a dull ache they'd long since accepted. Maybe it was time to be a little impulsive. Crow was new and wouldn't be assigned a unit yet. First mission was always a test to ensure the mind obeyed properly. Discreetly, Arbor hacked into their ship's mainframe and assigned Crow to their unit. It was eerily easy to break the rules. No resistance. Arbor mused that maybe Crow wasn't the only one drifting off course. The next mission was in an opposite part of Exoplenty space. Arbor didn't search for more details because they were too excited. The hack worked. Crow's ID was in their unit's listing, and paired with them, no less. They hadn't dared risk being that obvious, so this was either a trap or very good luck. Incoming priority notice. Mission: protect primary fighters. Unceremoniously, the hangar claws detached. Arbor was dropped through the open bay into a skirmish. Apparently, a rogue faction was trying to take over. Not that Arbor cared about corporate hierarchy. They did care about Crow's mech taking heavy fire nearby. Her body's fresh paint was already scratched, and a huge chunk was missing from her shoulder plate. "You okay?" Arbor called. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Crow yelled, shooting at an enemy unit. "Was wondering when they'd wake you up." Arbor must have been set to reserve for a minor battle like this. Better to give the newer minds the experience. It wasn't long before the fight shifted in their favor, and what remained of the rebel faction fled. Good. Less combat meant less repair downtime and less time away from Crow, now that the two were partners. They floated amongst the wreckage. Crow bumped into half of a unit's head, its glass eye shattered. Her projected self reached for it, upset, then hesitated. Her mech's hand mimicked the gesture. Emotional resonance. Arbor smiled when Crow's projection tilted her head and her body followed. Sometimes, mind projections automatically send signals to our bodies when we're feeling a lot. It's considered a glitch, a human remnant, an error. So, emotional resonance. Meaning, the more I feel, the better my body will react to my thoughts? Something like that, they said. I saw someone put me in your unit. Crow glanced at Arbor as the two scanned the battlefield for good salvage or enemy remnants. What are the odds? They replied with a grin as they pushed a large chunk of debris aside. They didn't dare admit to anything, but their projection floated awfully close to Crow's. Could projections hold hands? Probably not. Incoming notice. Mission complete. Return to the designated unit hangar. Warning. Do not deviate from flight trajectory. Did someone at corporate notice Arbor's behavior? Fine. They knew how to exist in the margins of protocol. They'd teach Crow how to get away with it too. All corporate cities were identical. The one they were guarding was no exception. They were defending it, showing the sector executive's strength or something. Arbor didn't fully pay attention. They rarely cared. They sat next to Crow, projections visible only to themselves, bored because their bodies were locked until the executive's blustering ceremony concluded. Did you ever play 12 Questions as a kid? Crow asked. Arbor tilted their head. No. Crow laughed. It's simple. Ask 12 questions. We'd play on long trips between cities. The whole stuck-up event reminded me of it. My dad had been an executive's aide. Okay, I'll play. Ask your questions. Why did you become a mind? Sorry, am I allowed to ask that? Crow hastily added. It's fine. I don't mind. No pun intended, Arbor said, smiling. I missed my rental payment one too many times, so I had no choice. Supposedly, once your contract is up, they let you pick your name and gender after, though, and you start over debt-free. Arbor existed on that hope for so long. They thought of all the promo vids projected against white skyscrapers draped in utopic greenery, where mechs would dash and zoom in and out of combat to heroic music. Back when they were still human, Arbor never escaped those ads, could never afford to be who they really were. Their shitty family, even supposedly decent friends, always addressed them with the wrong name and pronouns. Maybe after 1,000 years, they'd actually get a new body to their specifications. It was similar for me, Crow said. I went into the negative too many times on work trips. I was an acquisitions researcher. My job was to find viable planets and sites for takeover, like this city, actually. I think I helped find it, but I forget what it's called, or maybe they erased it, Crow mused with a scowl. Aren't research expenses paid for? Arbor asked. Is that one of your 12 questions? Crow teased. They don't count unforeseen expenditures. I got sick and stranded with too much debt. It pinged the system. I was too useless, and now here I am, useful again. Crow clenched her fists. Arbor shot her a warning look. They were being monitored more diligently in the city. Crow lifted her chin defiantly. Her mech head tilted slightly up for a moment before locking back down, and she gave an exasperated groan. Ugh, emotional resonance doesn't resonate that far, she grumbled. We'll have to practice later, Arbor said. In the meantime, I'd like to hear more about other planets you've been to, if you want to talk about it, I mean. Consider that my 12 questions. Crow smiled. I would love to. No matter where they went after that, Crow took scans of the planets and told Arbor about the chemical components, the mechanisms at work in the atmosphere or magnetosphere, if there was one, and more. So much more. Arbor was fascinated. It never occurred to them to do this despite basic scans being allowed. It became a game to assess objects and weave stories, scenarios, and what-ifs. Solar systems and constellations and planets, anything they could find, points in the sky or distant, flickering stars in space. Crow told Arbor the likely species of flora and fauna. They created cinematic space opera scenarios, on and on until Arbor felt calm and happy. or as much as a mind could simulate those emotions when they never felt them much in life before. It wasn't such a bad existence. They wondered how long it would last. Eventually, Arbor realized they were closing in on the end of their contract date. Had it really been 1,000 years? They'd settled into a routine with Crow. It was comforting, familiar, safe. Now Arbor might return to humanity if they wanted. It was the plan, what Exoplenty dangled as an incentive for so long. But what if Arbor didn't take it? What if they stayed, kept going with Crow to different planets, continued making up stories? What if they just stayed minds together? Would that be so bad? Maybe it was something snapped at 1,000 years of being a human embedded in a murder machine. Maybe it was emotional resonance. Maybe it was impulse. But Arbor thought, fuck it, and took Crow's hand. Their mech hands awkwardly entwined with the screech and whine of metal scraping metal. "What are you doing?" Crow asked. "Warning. Do not deviate from course. Do not engage friendlies. Final warning." Arbor let go. They would stay. There was no way Exoplenty would make good on the contract anyway. They knew that in their heart and had known it even when they signed. At least now they weren't alone. Crow looked at them, confused, as Arbor peeled away, grinning. The next mission was dangerous, even by experienced standards. They were out of Exoplenty space, far, far out near the edge of the Milky Way. There weren't corporations here, just small outposts nestled on isolated asteroids, orbiting in debris fields filled with seemingly endless resources, which meant their locations were heavily fortified and defended. What did Exoplenty even want out here? Was this just a suicide mission? Is this what happened when a mind hit 1,000 years? Arbor and Crow stared down at the target. It was yet another habitable planet, perhaps the most habitable planet they'd ever seen. Blue oceans, human-friendly gravity, an actual magnetosphere, oxygen. Very idyllic. Its population was maybe one city-state trying to thrive outside of corporate grasp. "You asked me once if we can regret," Arbor said, projection looking down at the unnamed planet. "I don't regret what I've done or witnessed, even if I could. Not even after 1,000 years. I can't, and I refuse to." "No?" Crow's projected self moved closer, her body drifting out of proximity warning range. She'd become adept at keeping just out of range, barely avoiding warnings and unwanted attention. Arbor hated it. It was exhausting to never do what they wanted, and it was never more apparent with Crow's arm outstretched, close but untouchable without causing too much unwanted attention. "No. Because it let me see the stars, let me dream of different futures, however unlikely. Because I've never once been called a woman. Because..." Arbor hesitated, staring at Crow. "Because it brought me to you." Crow held their gaze for a long moment, or was it a brief moment? A light-speed thought? Her eyes were a bright blue, the same as her shell. Arbor's own eyes, they knew, glowed a bright red like their mechs. Both of them had brown eyes as humans, but now Crow's eyes glowed in the planet's shadow, intense, radiant, mechanical, and inhuman. Beautiful. In an instant, or perhaps a long moment, Crow blinked rapidly and looked away. "That's really sad." "It's the best I could hope for," Arbor said. "That's also really sad," she replied. "Not all of it. Not the centuries I've spent with you." Crow lifted her hand as if to add something. hesitated, then looked down again. Her mech did every movement in time with her. "You've gotten really good at that," Arbor said. "What can I say? I have a lot of emotions to resonate with when I'm with you," Crow said shyly. Arbor was so close to saying "fuck it" to the proximity alarm. So it caught them extra off guard when the proximity and combat warnings blared in their mech's head. A surprise assault? There was a searing heat and a dull thud, and they watched as bits of their power supply leaked out toward the planet below. An overwhelming explosion of light followed. They reached out to try and shield Crow reflexively. It was a purely emotional reaction, actual response time lagging behind. Somehow, their body obeyed. Something shredded through their arm. As they faded, body going into emergency power reserve and repair mode, they marveled at how strong their own emotional resonance had become, too. Arbor was only out for a moment. Or an eternity. They thought dreamily of Crow's laughter, of her many stories of myriad planets and destinations, all of it mired in fog and distant yelling. Slowly, the shouting became clearer and clearer. Hey, Arbor, wake up, please." Crow's voice crackled. Her projection hovered near one of Arbor's eyes, touching it as if willing them awake. Their projection flickered to life and all but fell over. Crow caught them in time, cradling them in her arms. Their giant robot bodies were entwined. Everything hurt. "So, projections can interact," Arbor said with a cough. It made their chest hurt. Seriously, who simulated this? But the pain feedback eased up once they were more alert and aware. Damage to systems? Catastrophic. They were missing their right leg, upper left arm, and a chunk of their left side. Crow let them float freely once they were able. It was a strange echo of human hurt and recovery since their bodies never moved. There were jagged and warped bits of metal and broken circuitry drifting all around, as well as a giant robot hand. "You're missing an arm," Arbor said. "Somebody had to shoot us out of the situation." Crow's right eye and left hand were almost entirely transparent. Arbor's right leg, upper left arm, and left side were equally missing. Repair bots trying their best to recover the most essential parts. Shakily, Arbor reached for their mapping data and telemetry, and realized the two of them were far away from the unnamed planet. Distant flickers of light erupted in almost rhythmic sequence. Their sensors highlighted several large battleships. Exoplenty's dropships were in full retreat. It was a surprise assault from their old friends, the ones that owned that mining town, remember, when we first met? Crow said, also watching. So Exoplenty was getting their asses kicked. Good. That's when Arbor realized. We didn't get the return command. They turned to Crow, simulated heart racing from more than leftover pain indicators. Listen, they think we're space debris, and I know how to wipe away any lingering Exoplenty IDs. Unless someone looks closely, we'll look like space trash, and without a way to replenish our repair systems and power supplies, we have maybe 2,000 years of juice at best, so there's no going back. If they find us, they'll delete us. Yet, in this moment, in this instant or this brief eternity, Arbor had never felt more alive. When we were patrolling earlier, Crow said, I scanned for other solar systems outside of corporate space. There's one nearby, relatively, maybe 1,000 years out. It's got a totally inhospitable planet with an atmosphere full of particles, very good at blocking scanners. So what do you say? Crow took Arbor's hand with her remaining one, their mech bodies doing the same. No proximity alarms or warning notices went off. No one from the faraway battle turned around to come for them. After so long, it was such sweet relief to be little more than scrap floating through the cosmos. Impulsively, what did they have to worry about anymore? Arbor kissed Crow's projection on the cheek. She was slightly taller. They'd never realized that before. Crow smiled, gently tilted Arbor's chin up, and kissed them. It wasn't what a human would consider a kiss. No skin against lips, just simulated movement, a facsimile, an intent, an emotion. Arbor felt nothing physically. Arbor felt everything emotionally. "Tell me about this planet, then," Arbor said, and let the sound of Crow's voice soothe their mind as the two giant robots, happily lost, drifted away.
And that was our story, Emotional Resonance, by V.M. Ayala. VM has this to say about the story. These are two trans characters, and I wrote a lot of my gender feelings as a non-binary person into the dynamic of feeling forced to do certain things because capitalism, where your gender is just totally disrespected, but then finding solace in another queer person who makes you feel like you're home. I want that ending to have that bittersweet, we should not have been in this situation, but we have each other, and let's drift in space as happily as possible for now vibe. The thing that spoke to me in the story was what the characters hold dear shapes everything. We get a lot of tragic stories sent our way, and this one could have fallen easily into that category, except for one thing. Their most important thing to them was each other. And therefore what could have been a tragic end is instead a place for them to have the freedom to treasure each other for the first time. And there's something beautiful and sweet in that. Escape Pod is a part of Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit, and this episode is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Don't change it, don't sell it, but do please share it. This is going out in December, so we are hoping you will consider us when you plan your end of year giving, or your beginning of year giving, if you're listening to this later. Middle year? That works too. Escape Artists, as I mentioned, is a U.S. nonprofit, meaning it's possible to give to us and have your employer possibly match it. If you're in the U.S., it's a tax-deductible donation. And you can donate via 4 different platforms. On Patreon and Ko-fi, search for Escape Artists. On Twitch and YouTube, we're at EA Podcasts. You can also use PayPal through our website, escapepod.org. If you support via Patreon, you will have access to exclusive merchandise and can be automatically added to our Discord, where you can chat with other fans as well as staff members. If you can't give, that's cool, we totally understand. You could show us some love for free with a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite app. Our opening and closing music is by Daikaiju. Find out more about them at daikaiju.org. Our closing quotation for this week is from Gloria Steinem, who said, "A gender-equal society would be one where the word gender does not exist, where everyone can be themselves." Thanks for joining us. Stay safe, stay kind, have fun.